The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. I'm Joe Costello, and it has been amazing to see the response that we are getting to these episodes. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you guys are writing reviews, and we appreciate it. We're seeing the numbers skyrocket as we speak with some of the greatest engine builders on the planet. And on this episode, we're going to speak with someone who just had a major milestone in land speed racing, Kenny Duttweiler, the engine builder on George Poteet's Speed Demon streamliner, just broke a long-standing record with the Speed Demon, and we're going to speak with him on the program. Of course, my co-host, Mr. Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales for Total Seal, is here to join me. Keith, I am super excited about this one.
Yeah, this should be great. Kenny's been doing this forever. He's a legend in the industry. I'm sure he'll have a lot of nice little insights and tips for everybody, and it's just great to have him on the show. I was blown away by the performance. Not unexpected, because I know what this man does, but to see those numbers and to see how everything came together up in Bonneville, absolutely stunning. And we'll just say, and knowing Kenny, there's more up his sleeve. There always is. The
publicity that they were able to get with this record, pretty amazing. Bonneville is really intense with the hardcore fans. This one broke through, and the fact that we have him on Hidden Horsepower not that far after this major milestone, that's a big deal for the show. Just talk a little bit, Keith, about the significance of what goes on out there at Bonneville.
It's one of those places. I'll say this, and Kenny's going to want to hit me and hate me, and everybody will. I've been there, but I've never been there. I've actually stood on the salt, looked out. I was a week early. I have family up that direction, and I was up visiting, and I knew Speed Week was coming, so I've stood on the salt. They were preparing the salt. I'm looking at the salt, but I've never been there to the actual event, and it is one of those things I truly, dearly want to do and is on my bucket list. But it is where drag racing began. This is where it all started. You look at the guys that are still going there. This is the hardcore elite that have been there forever. There's no accolades, there's no money, there's they don't get the presents, they don't get what they deserve for sure. And what they have to go through and the pioneering and the innovation is just incredible. And like I said, and it's where drag racing began. This is where it all started. This is where the hot rod started. So it's just an awesome thing to see what these guys did. And as you stated, it broke through. It's made it into the public eye. Just like it did back in the day with Goldenrod and Craig Breedlove and all the legends where it actually broke through and people took notice.
Amazing stuff. Now, you should have never admitted that you had not been to the. It's okay though. It's okay. We're gonna let Kenny attack you a little bit though. So let's bring on our guest of honor on this edition, and the glow of victory probably still surrounding him, Mr. Kenny Duttweiler. Welcome to Hidden Horsepower.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure to be here.
So, what about Keith having not been at Bonneville for Speed Weeks? What does that say?
Well, he's just part of a huge group of people that admit that that's on their bucket list, and I mean we get that constantly. We'll get people in the industry that have never been, and now that it's started to gain some notoriety, I think it's. It used to be kind of a hidden feature thing, and nobody really paid much attention to Bonneville. Now we got guys sitting there watching the postings for the speeds, during the week and stuff. So it's gotten a lot more popular, and so for most people, a couple of days at Bonneville would just about satisfy anything they need to do, because the cars are not right in front of you. You watch a car go down the course, it's going to be a fair distance away, so you get to hear it and watch it go by. Kind of hard to judge the speed on most of those cars because there's nothing out there that's there to reference off of. No telephone poles, no trees, no markers of any kind that you could really relate to. So, it's a lot different way of going racing. didn't take me long to figure out it was a 5-mile drag race, and that was one of the most important things, I think, is you got to look at how much they give you to play on, and it's 5 miles, so you got to do your best and try to use as much of that 5 as you get.
Very interesting. So Keith is not a bad person for having not been there. That being the case, I too will also admit I have not been there. It is on my bucket list. Maybe, Keith, you and I will go together. We'll do like live on the scene hidden horsepower or something. But it's always been fascinating. And you mentioned a resurgence. Why do you think that is, Kenny?
Oh, probably so much stuff on the internet today. They didn't have the internet when they started. They didn't have any means of communication. If there's any postings, it might have been a month later. So now it's gained a lot of popularity, and the magazines have helped promote it a lot. Hot Rod magazines have been a big promoter of it, as far as we can see. The recently released magazine article was a complete to the detail engine build of the big engine that was in a streamliner, and it's kind of this. It's just kind of like gaining momentum. We see people in all forms of the industry that are watching it now, because if you do well and you the obvious fact is, to do well there, you have to be able to run more than just one pass, and so reliability of the components you use, the manufacturer can point to the fact that he has my product in there, and it's done well. So I think this all kind of comes together. There's you can go on YouTube and see quite a few videos on YouTube now, and this all helps make it gain popularity.
So just so everybody understands, in case you haven't already followed the story to this point, Speed Week 2020, the record of the two-way average was 470.015 miles per hour. The one-way in the last mile, the flat-out speed record was 481.576 miles per hour. This is with a big block Chevrolet, twin turbocharged, 35 to 36 pounds of boost. Tell us whatever else we need to know about this project before we let Keith Jones pepper you with a couple of questions.
Okay, well, introduction to how we ended up with the big block in the streamliner. We formerly had used the small block 9-inch deck stuff because the car is pretty narrow. The upper frame rails are tucked in pretty tight, and we literally couldn't fit most typical billet-headed big block engines in it without cutting the car up. So we had an opportunity to drop an engine in the car with some Dart Pro 120-degree heads on it, and we could make it fit. So that got the whole thing started. And then a trip to the PRI show a couple of years ago, I went on a shopping mission there to try to round up as much as I could in the way of parts. But the interesting thing is, this is probably a more conventional engine build in terms of the fact that it's a Dart big M block. It's a Dart cast head. The crank obviously is Callie's billet crank, but that's part of the form there. We have our rods made in Sweden by Stefan Verdi, and we just kind of picked our way through the parts list. David Visner built the intake for it. Steve Watt and his crew, the guys that built the car, they got together with trying to think of the name of the company out of Australia that builds intercooler cores. Anyway, they come up with a pretty good intercooler, so we ended up with packaging this thing to get it in the car. And being a conventional big block, let's say, in most regards, the horsepower number was probably already pretty much a known value. That with those ProMod 88s, the second generation version, they're good for about 3,400 horsepower, and we were able to do some stuff on the dyno of just under 3,200 without trying to kill it. And the torque numbers that it generated were huge, so it was easy to make some speed without a lot of boost, I guess would be the best way to put it. And we build the whole car around the engine, basically, in terms of the mentality for the gearing, principally the gearing in the rear end, which is 154 final drive, which is pretty tall gear, and Craig Liberty's 7-speed transmission in it. So the 7-speed was kind of a gift because we needed a gear to pull away from the push truck without having to push the thing for a quarter of a mile. So we figured, well, hell, if we had a 6-speed and a low first gear, we could accomplish everything we needed. He was able to give us a 7-speed, and so our low gear is low enough that it will accelerate away from the push truck at about 35 miles an hour. So that's about 300 to 400 feet. 500 is about the most distance. So we've literally capitalized on almost the full 5 miles on that part of it. But the fuel management system, the technology that's in that thing is mind-boggling. I mean, with the Motec M150, Shane's managed to combine a whole bunch of stuff into what the dash does and what the ECU does. And we'll look at probably 100 channels of information after a run. So it's, it's kind of hard to run that car without testing. But so we do our testing at the track. So we just learn a lot at Speed Week because we can't go out 2 weeks before and test. And so usually we'll take a couple of runs to get things sorted out. But the thing about it is it can't be done without a huge team, and the concept on the engine basically is it's got to be pretty rugged in terms of, the connecting rods in that thing weigh a lot compared to what most people would associate with it, and the pistons are really robust, and managed to score some head gasket sealing stuff there between some of these aftermarket flame hoops, they call them, and Keith having made me literally a piston ring that we use to replace the O-ring in the block. The benefit was it's 60 thousandths tall instead of 41 thousandths. So some of these things have improved the durability, and the biggest thing there is the keeping the engine cool. I mean, you can if you steam the water or get the water hot in the engine, and it does steam, it'll usually take a head gasket with it. And sometimes you're not really sure what caused the head gasket to fail, but as we worked our way through the small block stuff, we figured that out pretty quickly. You just have to move a lot of water through that motor. And I mean, we put water in the bottom, we put water in the top, and that's even true of the big block. And the big block, one of its big benefits is the water flow in the head is much better than it is, say, with the small block stuff, because of the fact that they were generally made for drag racing and they had a lot of material inside the head and not a lot of area for water flow. But this big block head is pretty darn conventional, and I know we're talking to an engine builder this morning, and he's kind of laughing about the fact that it's nothing exotic. It's an over-the-counter block. It's a cast cylinder head. And when you think about it, I guess that is a pretty good combination of the engine itself and the parts we used.
Very interesting. The Shane, you referenced Shane Tecklenburg. Keith, jump in here, talk about Total Seal's involvement. This is obviously a major story, and hearing Kenny just list the people that are involved, Liberty Transmissions, et cetera, to make this thing happen. It's a who's who of motorsports. Get in there, Keith.
Yeah, again, I want to thank Kenny, we've worked together for years, and one of the things that he had mentioned, and a lot of the guys that I work with that are going to Bonneville, I see them. And it's one of the things he touched on that a lot of people just don't realize it. It's got to be built like a brick poop house. I mean, it really does. It's flyweight, lightweight, ultra thin, all these things. Guys, it's got to go 5 miles. This is a long way to go, wide open throttle. This is a lot of heat, a lot of torture, just a brutal environment. And like Ken had mentioned, us building them, the head gasket sealing hoops. We needed to build something bigger, taller, something to get more bite into the gasket area. We do gapless top rings on this thing. One of the things I was going to ask Kenny is what kind of end gaps you've got to run. You run that kind of, heat and duration. You got a lot of thermal expansion in that engine. Things like he was talking about how much water it's got to move to keep this thing cooled down. So you've got to run a very tough top ring. We've got to run a lot of end gap. Hence the gapless ring comes into play, so it doesn't have the blow-by problems. And things that he touched on, that just the packaging of the whole car. I've seen the views of the car with the body off, and it's just amazing. I don't think you could squeeze a penny in between anything on that car. It's so packed in there. It's an amazing achievement that these guys have done, and a big group effort. But from a ring point of view, what I see is it's just got to be durable. It's got to be, we've got to build it tough. It's got to handle a lot of abuse, and we've got to keep it, the blow-by under control on that thing, because it's a beast.
A couple of interesting facets there. One is that ring you made me, and then subsequent to that, we made the ring bigger and just cut it and then put it in and end-gapped it like you would a piece of O-ring wire. And that was even better yet, because you didn't have to be so on your diameters. But the top ring, we've done some stuff. I think you suggested at one time we took a 43 thousandths top ring and made it gapless. So that gave us essentially about 22 thousandths of contact on the ring contact. And that particular engine would pull 16 to 18 inches of vacuum with the turbos off the engine, and it pulled 10 inches of vacuum at 2,000 horsepower. So much for the fact we did have a 42 thousandths ring as far as the ring itself, but the actual contact face was was half of that, and that was pretty amazing to see them seal up that well. It's we've never run anything but a gapless top ring at Bonneville, and we get very little fuel dilution. You will get some on a run, but not a lot. And so for that point, the fact that we're keeping the pressure out of the pan, I think it's a real good deal.
Kenny, there was a point in the event that you guys burned a piston, and that was well covered in the media, and you guys had to do kind of like a field triage and rebuild the engine, and I immediately thought about the Total Seal piston rings. We've heard from Keith and many of our guests on Hidden Horsepower about, rings, and when you pull it apart, you can put them back in. What do you do in a situation like that where you're in the field, you're swapping out a piston, you're up against the clock? You guys were able to field hone it out there, which is just insane. You can see some photos with some sandpaper and stuff. Tell us a little bit about that swap, and what did you do with the piston ring? Well,
it's kind of interesting on that one, because we were going to actually set that engine aside and put the 443-inch LS motor in, which is almost as fast. So in the meantime, since naturally when you burn a hole in a piston and you blow oil everywhere, so they were on the detail to clean up the car and replace some of the wiring that got burned. And so, just for the heck of it, Chris Vosky decided he'd pull the head off, and there was a hole in the middle of the piston, and the cylinder wall wasn't hurt hardly at all. So a bunch of them jumped on, and I had spare pistons and rings and tins with me, so we just put it back together, and Chuck Jenks was there with a file and the rings, end gap in the rings with a file, which is, I felt sorry for him on that one. But got it back together. They hadn't completely finished cleaning up the car yet, so the LS engine was still sitting on the ground, so we just put the big block back in it. And essentially what had happened, and I guess you're going to have to assume that on an engine with a plenum on the manifold and blowing air in and valves opening and closing it in different sequences, some runners are going to get either more air or some reversion. If the boost, especially if the boost is a little on the low side, the actual crossover pressure on overlap could be 50, 60, 70 pounds maybe, whereas pressure in the runner is only, say, 25 or 30. So there's a possibility you can get some reversion, but some sequence of events allowed that cylinder to be leaner than the rest of them. And if you went on what was happening in the runner and you based it on air, we were getting more air in that runner because the fuel is a fixed value. So the only way you go lean is if you put more air in it and make more power on that cylinder. But at the end of the day, the solution was really, really simple. We just added 10% more fuel to that runner, and then made it 7 more passes. And the old bottle brush hone thing worked pretty good, because you could look at the plugs after a run, and there was no evidence of any oiling or anything on the plugs. They were just kind of bleach white. So maybe sometimes it makes you wonder if you try too hard on the hone job in the shop. You look at what we did in some 400 grit sandpaper on a ball hone, but it pays to take spare parts. We take plenty of spares. I mean, we go prepared. We have in one trailer we have Heliarc and a TIG, or MIG and a TIG, I guess you could say. We have Brown Miller hose maker. We've got hose. We've got fittings. ARP gives us one of those tit boxes full of bolts, nuts, washers, stuff like that. We have plenty of tires mounted. We have chop saws and cleaning tanks. We go like we're going to be in business there for a while, and it really pays off because it allows you to do stuff like that. We have the ability to pick an engine up out of the trailer and slide it out on a boom and drop it down in the car. We don't have to use a cherry picker and roll around on the salt. So we've really streamlined the operation over the years, and it's worked out pretty good. But that engine rebuild deal is not unusual. Because we have generally spare cylinder heads and plenty of head gaskets and stuff, and we just to verify that the burned piston deal wasn't an injector related deal. We have a pretty elaborate flow bench that we've made up using some of our leftover Motec stuff like the dash and the M800 ECU and stuff. So we built a flow bench with that stuff, and the first thing that happens is those two injectors come out and get flowed. And they were right on target with all the rest of them. So they would just simply come down to we had a lean condition in that one cylinder.
Keith, jump in here with a question.
Well, what I was going to say is kind of like the old Boy Scouts motto, be prepared. And, that's exactly what these guys go to Bonneville, and it's, not a place you're just down the street and can make a quick phone call to Summit and have a delivery this afternoon. They go up there with such a specialized vehicle. I can only imagine it. They probably go up with an entire parts warehouse full of stuff, because where else are you going to get it? But, to touch on the honing thing real quick, it's funny. The ball hone gets a bad rap. I am a ball hone advocate. I think they work very well. I think they're very hard to screw up. I get guys that, and we're honing people. We're big on cylinder finish. We're big on getting the numbers right. I'm standing here looking at, hang on one sec here, folks, 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm looking at 10 brand new profilometers sitting in my office that just came in. So we're big on the measured numbers, but a way to get those things is the ball hone. They really do work well. They're a great field tool. A lot of guys use them in the shop. So don't laugh at the ball hone, folks. They work.
It just seems like it's a little bit of a junkyard approach, but at the end of the day, we didn't really care, because if it just sealed that hole up, if it wasn't perfect, we never did use all the horsepower. So the coolest thing about a boosted engine is some of the technologies that people worry themselves sick over on an NA motor. You don't have to really consider it really much, because you always have something left in the bank. I mean, if you need to make another couple hundred horsepower, it's just more boost. And the only thing that you can run out of is the ability to make more boost. So we've even looked at next year's program will include some 94 millimeter turbos for the big block. And but the fact that the 88 millimeter turbos are fairly big, and they're the NHRA Pro Mod size. My 256 inch small block, which is basically just a hugely de-stroked 2.38 stroke small block Chevy with a 4 1/8 bore. That thing also ran with those Pro Mod 88s on it, and on the dyno it made 2,600 horsepower.
Wow! Out
of 255 or 6 inches. So it took forever to get them to spool up, but once they spooled up, they were great. And so it just shows you that boost is everything. That engine probably made about 500 horsepower without the turbos, and picked up about 2,000 with them. And that's the thing that's hard to wrap your arms around, because all these engines that we run, the various sizes and stuff, I think the LS engine made close to 700 without the turbos on it. With the turbos on it, it made 2880. So there's over 2,000 horsepower that gets stacked onto the top of that. It's just amazing. And of course, with that 2,000 horsepower comes all the liabilities of making that much more horsepower. You get cylinder pressures that are completely out of sight. One of the things that we need to back up a little bit on, Keith was talking about ring-in gap. I don't run a lot of ring-in gap. We look at the end of the ring now. We finally got around to doing that with a microscope. But even with the gapless top, it's about 32 thousandths, maybe 34 thousandths on that big bore. And never had any occasion of the rings actually contacting each other. You know, you'll look at a ring sometimes and it looks like they've butted, but that's just because the ring was split right at that point. And don't you find that, Keith, to be kind of true if you're just looking at them from?
Yeah, I agree, Kenny. You really have to get it up under a scope and look at it and really look at how the file marks where it's been filed, how they're, are they starting to flatten out and lay over? There are times where you can see it very predominantly and it really jumps out at you, but most of the time you really got to look. One of the tricks that I personally have employed over the years is to, after I file the rings, and you'll laugh, folks, this really works, I'll come back in and paint them back down. Blue dicum, machinist dicum, you put a dicum on there, a paint, you'd be amazed. The stuff actually stays on there, and if you're not really good at spotting whether a ring's buttered or not, if you paint the ends back down, when it comes back apart, you're going to see it because it's going to wear right through that colorant, and you're going to see that silver spot where the other parts aren't. They're going to be colored still, so it does help to make it easier to see if you're not really trained to look at it. So I agree with you completely, and it's also a testament that you've got the temperature under control because there's guys out there that, in applications like Kenzie, when they're running 40 thousandths and still button it. So again, we're back to that cooling. That really, obviously, really got the temperature under control on that thing.
Yeah, what's really interesting, we don't have a radiator, but we have about 18 gallons of water that we cycle through the engine. Wow. And if it leaves the starting line at, say, 100 degrees, it'll be about 130, 135 degrees at the finish line. It's that much water, but it's only got a minute to get it all heated up because that whole job is done in 1 minute. And George never lifts the throttle. When he puts it in gear off the push truck, he goes wide open, and it stays wide open until he clicks off the other end. And so it's not all 35 pounds of boost, but it's starts off at 14 or 15 and just gets ramped in based off of the wheel speed. But even so, it's still, I don't think anybody would consciously put one on the dyno and try to replicate that run watching it on the dyno. I mean, you'd probably give up before the engine did, but I don't know about a 1 minute pull. So.
Yeah, that's a little hard on the parts and a little hard on the dyno, and that's amazing water temperature numbers. That's incredible. I would have never have guessed that low of a number ever. That again is a real testament to what you guys are doing.
It's all about, you got to move it. If you move it through the engine, that's what it amounts to. You remember the old theory was, that you put a restrictor in to keep the water from going through too fast and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, it couldn't pull the heat out. Well, probably everybody subscribed to that for quite a while, but then when they figured out that really wasn't the case, it just takes a lot of water moving around everywhere to eliminate hot spots. We've even in years past actually pressurized the cooling system with 15 or 20 pounds of pressure just to help move the water through the block.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Kenny, and for what I understand, this was a big record run, of course. George Poteet, owner, driver. There was some left on the table, right? Like you guys didn't get exactly all of it. I heard or read there was he's shifting by ear, and that is just incredible.
Yep. Yeah, it was, there's always something to ruin your parade. We're standing there on the starting line, sitting there idling. They've already given us the push-off order, so you want to run. And George is pointing at the dash and looking out the dash, and there's a series of red lights across the top of the dash, which is the shift light, basically. It's like a Formula One style shift light. So all the shift lights are on, so I says, well, just tag the limiter, make your gear change. So he did. He hit the rev limiter at 8,700 every pass, every gear. But the problem was it's a pretty soft rev limiter, so it doesn't just abruptly stop the forward motion. So when we got back and downloaded the data, 15 seconds of the 60-second pass was on the rev limiter. So a couple of those, I just looked at the distance from the time it started on the limiter to it went off the limiter. It was 0.4 of a mile. So during that portion of the run, we were basically flatlined on the acceleration rate. And if you would have put together the run he had before, where he's shifting right at 8,000 within 50 RPMs or so, he looked like a pro stock driver. The that run would have probably been up 8 or 10 miles an hour. So it's that I anticipated the 480. In fact, I just figured we'd go 480 or maybe a couple of miles an hour over that. But I didn't realize how easily it went 481. I mean, that's pretty remarkable when you look at it. And the RPM limit on the engine, we don't know what it is because the camshaft is the same thing you'd run in a drag race car, so it's probably good to 9,000, 9,500. But there's absolutely no incidences of buzzing it up. In fact, I'm not so sure, but what that didn't make it run better than the previous run where we shifted at 8,000. So, it's always, there's always a little bit. There's just that little bit to entice you to come back and try again, and then you look at your traction control data, you look at how long you're on the wheel spin and where it goes off, and then what did you do about the boost? Well, it quit spinning the tire, but we didn't put enough boost in it at that point to get it aggravated to spin the tire again. So when you combine all these elements, it's conceivable the thing could go 500, and the whole thing is based on the race course you get handed, because this year the salt was actually in reasonably good condition, and when you can see rubber marks on the salt, that's when it's really good. So we could see some rubber marks out as the car is going out, and if we could come back next year with a similar condition, then even if it doesn't go 500, it's going to go 495. So anyway, and you do this stuff enough and you get enough accumulated data, you can pretty much predict what the change is going to net you in terms of the speed. And we're kind of in a fortunate position there where when we make the change, we kind of know what the number is going to be. And if it isn't there, we'll find the reason, and it'll be who knows what, but there'll be a reason it didn't go as fast as we thought it would.
The idea that you guys are able to rival or get near some of the turbine-driven streamliners, that's pretty amazing as a piston power guy. That's got to be pretty cool to be coming back on some of the speed records set down by the turbo cars.
It is. We kind of thought after they went as fast as they did that, maybe that was just an unattainable thing to mess with, and then we did realize that the current record is 482 for the average, so we've got to pick up about 13 miles an hour on our average. And the exit speed, the 503 exit speed, the turbine car's probably got a nod on that because, it's just a whole different breed of cat. I mean, it really doesn't remind you of a piston engine package, but it is wheel driven, and that's all that counts. So, but it gives us something to shoot for, and gives George another reason to be back next year. So that's the good part of it.
Yeah, Kenny, I was just going to hit you up. I mean, that's outstanding. Like you say, it brings you back. You left a little there or missed a little bit, so it brings you back. But kind of going to the nostalgia side of everything. I mean, you've been doing this forever. I mean, your name is synonymous with the turbo V6 Buicks, and really helped herald bring that whole era of that engine in. And now we've got the LS engines out there today, and just I grew up in the day of the old draw-through or blow-through, quadrajet and an old Ray J turbo, and if you didn't have the carb right, I mean, you watch the thing melt down. It's just amazing what is capable today with electronic fuel injection and engine management. What do you see as the big thing beside in that's changed in the shortcomings? Because I see so many guys that are trying to build these things using stock pistons and rings and powdered metal connecting rods and and wanting to get really big numbers, and so just kind of your take on all that.
It's really pretty simple. If along the way I think I had some help getting my mind focused on cylinder pressure, and really, cylinder pressure is what you're going to combat at the end of the day. If a production engine's got 1,500 pounds of cylinder pressure, or a NASCAR car's 1,700, 1,800, 1,900 pound cylinder pressure, and a diesel might be 5,000. We don't know what they are, but we're pushing cylinder pressures well over 3,000 pounds. So if you know that going in, then the first thing you're going to have to do is make sure that everything you put in the engine is capable of living in that environment for a while anyway. And then the next thing is to get a good fuel management system that can give you some pretty finite control on the spark and the fuel, and probably more on the spark than anything, because you only have to have a misplaced spark one time at those cylinder pressures, and you'll bend a rod. And so it's kind of like you build your diesel engine, but you run on alcohol. And it's probably these guys are. Well, I had a guy come by the shop the other day with a 5.3 junkyard motor. He wanted to. I put cam bearings in. He was going to put the pistons and rings back in that came out of the junkyard motor, and he was going to just open the top ring gap up, because they've been told on the internet that they need to be 30 thousandths or something, or they'll break the top of the piston. But, I said, don't you kind of get tired of doing that? And he said, no, it's kind of fun. He said, we just go buy another junker and put it in there. So I guess, if they're having fun doing that, then there's no problem with it. You can lean on that stuff pretty hard before it fails, but I guess the idea of it failing in a streamliner at, say, 400 plus miles an hour, and one in a drag race car at 130 or 40 or 50, the consequences can be quite a bit different. So you really don't want to have things blowing up if you can avoid it.
Yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of our Hidden Horsepower podcast. Keith is always shouting like, hey, just because it's on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's true or the right way to do it. And as you said that, Kenny, I thought about, well, what about the consequences associated with blowing up an engine? It's not necessarily just the engine is damaged. There's oil, there's crashing into the wall, there's who knows what could happen if you have an engine expire. Your example is extreme, obviously, out there at Bonneville. But, if you're going to do something, do it the right way the first time and avoid that. As fun as it might be to go to the junkyard and hunt.
Yeah, sometimes it's a goal. What motivates you? What's your goal? Even if your goal is just to go out and run and have fun, that's one thing. And there's plenty of reasons to do some of that stuff. If you're taking it to a well-funded professional level, then you really can't leave anything on the table. I mean, you have to be looking at all things, and you can't really equip either the dyno or the car with enough data acquisition. I mean, it's we think we've got a lot, but there's still some more stuff for us to look at. I mean, it's interesting little things like the temperature in the engine bay when it's all sealed up is really not all that hot. But if you have any oil migrate out, through like that burn piston or anything, the exhaust temperatures are up in the 1400 degree range at the end of the run, and the headers are literally yellow, and they're wrapped with an armor with some white looking stuff on the inside. I don't know what the heck you would call it, but it's a pretty good temperature abatement deal. But if there's one thing that hot oil can hit, you'll have a fire. And once you get a fire going, it starts burning up the wires right away, and kind of ruins your day there. But we've figured out that we take the 40 gallons of water we've got between the intercooler and the radiator, or the cooling tower, and when he shuts the engine off, it automatically pumps or sprays that water all over the top of the engine. So when you take the body off, it looks like somebody's in there with a sprinkler system. But what that does is that helps abate some fires and stuff. I mean, we've actually had the water put a fire out where the fire extinguisher system didn't. So, and I'm not sure if the fire extinguisher system's ever been 100%, but the water system, pretty darn good.
Well, I wanted to make a comment real quick. And Ken had talked about the young guys out there that, they don't mind blowing them up. Well, I just wanted to touch on that because I hear the same thing. And I'll say about the only thing out there I'm interested in yanking the engine in and out of is maybe a dragster, because that's pretty straightforward. If any of you guys out there yank the engine out of a late model Mustang, this is not a lot of fun. Why would you want to do it more than once?
That's a project, yeah, absolutely. And
this is a lot of work, yanking that in and out of there. But with that said, what do you think about next year for Bonneville, Ken? You got some more tricks up your sleeve?
We've got, Shane and I sat down and we put our list together. We invited the crew to submit little things they'd like to see, and one of the smart ones was an engine stand, because instead of rebuilding the engine on the floor of the trailer, we put it on an engine stand. But there's always something to add to the equation. But there's a quite a few areas that we know just from the data we look at, which and I'll have to give Motec credit for the data because there is so much stuff that you can look at that it gives you a headache, and it takes you a while to sort through it. But once you've figured it all out, say, well, we could, if we did this, we could gain here, and pretty soon you've compiled a list of things that were really going to make the car faster. I mean, it's just evolutionary, and to put that in perspective, the first year we went 400 was with a 297-inch small block, and it went 401. That was probably about 2008. And every year after that, we picked up, in fact, one of our small blocks a couple of years ago went 464. So basically picked up 63 miles an hour over the period of, 2008 to 12 years. So we really go back with a better plan every year, and it shows. And just so, we look at things like right now, what we're looking at more than anything is power management, because power management is the whole key to the whole thing, because you're on a salt that's kind of abrasive but doesn't have a whole lot of grip. It has a tire that's got 100 pounds of air in it, that's got probably about 3 inches of tire on the ground, treadless. So wheel spin is your enemy, and working your way around the wheel spin and getting control is where we've gained so much over the years. I mean, the engines, other than the fact that we put bigger turbos on the same engines, they're pretty much the same. I think one or two of them still got the same camshaft we put in it probably 10 years ago.
It's a 5-mile drag race. You said it at the beginning. Very interesting. Kenny, any final thoughts about this project other than you've captured the imagination of so many people out there, and it's great to see Bonneville headlines and record-breaking performances. This has been such a tough year for everybody. This was a great bit of news for the people who are following and interested in motorsports. Is there any other thought about about George, about the Speed Demon, about the guys who worked on the project as you look back on your accomplishment at Bonneville?
Well, one thing for sure, it is a huge team effort. We have Steve Maxwell and the group there at built the car. We've had guys like Chuck Jenks, who has a doctorate in, I think, aerodynamics or something. He's really well versed with stuff. He's been around NASCAR land for a long time. I think his current job is the aerodynamicist on Haas's Formula One car. We have Danny Drina, who's an engineer, chassis builder guy. Works. I think his shop is located in Indy at the track there. And then we have the Colesbeck brothers, Keith and Kenny. And Kenny is the carbon fiber guy, and Keith works for Hendricks Motorsports. And the list goes on and on. You have Chris Roski, who's been around me forever, and real ambitious, real go-getter, so he's the bull in the china closet. And but we've got all these guys, and there's way too many of them to mention, that are all extremely good, and they all have a job, and they don't try to cross-pollinate on this stuff. I mean, the guy that's supposed to be packing the parachutes, he's not going to be in there trying to pull a cylinder head. And so once we've got everybody sorted out and doing their jobs, then it becomes a pretty nice team effort. But there's no way that you could ever do it without the amount of people that we have there. It's you might do it once, but you're not going to do it consistently.
Kenny, at the end of each episode of Hidden Horsepower, Keith and I often talk about, the next generation of engine builders. Where are they going to come from? Who are they? And that's part of the goal of this podcast. And Keith has had a lot reach out to him and say, hey, man, they take great pleasure in hearing our guests give some piece of advice to the next generation. What would you say to someone who's kind of just getting into it, engine building as a trade or even as a hobby? What is one or two little bits of advice that you would give to those folks as they set out?
There's a couple of things that they really have to address. One of them is you can never get enough information. But today that is really pretty easy. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation, but there are magazines like my favorite one is called Race Engine Technology out of England, and it's a little bit hard to understand for a novice. But as you keep reading into it, you get some really good information, because they deal a lot with the very high end part of the industry, like the Formula One stuff, for example, and NHRA drag racing, and they've done some stuff on the Bonneville thing. And then, beyond that, you really can't gain a lot of ground until you get hooked up with somebody in the industry that is doing well, if it's nothing more than hanging around their shop or working for them. But it's such a long learning curve if you try to do it by yourself. So the thing that's just almost mandatory, or I guess I should say, places like that Sam's Automotive Machining stuff, where they can go in and get a pretty good hands-on background, and then move on from there. These are the kinds of things. Those are probably the three things. Work associated, the schools, and then as much good information as you can get, not off the internet so much, because I read some of those postings those guys will post, and I mean, they're just guys that are bored and want to brag about nothing, I guess. But the main thing is every town probably has somebody that does some kind of performance stuff, and that's where they need to look. They may not want to make a career out of working for somebody, but they can sure learn a lot from them.
Excellent. And it's funny, several people have said samtech.edu is a good place to get a foundational education. We know those guys over there as well, and I think that is great. Keith, any final thoughts for Kenny before we let him go after this amazing episode of Hidden Horsepower?
Yeah, well, what's it going to take to get you in the cockpit of that thing, Kenny?
Nice.
Oh, I don't have any desire to do that. In fact, I think I'm amazed that George does at his age, but the drag racing is, that's my favorite of all the things. I guess it's my second favorite now. But drag racing, you run a quarter of a mile, you got about a half mile stop, you're back in the pits, and that one it took a couple of years to get me re-educated to the fact that nothing happens in a hurry, other than the car goes really fast. And since George has about 50-some runs now over 400 miles an hour, it's unlikely that we'd ever put anybody else in that car, just because of the experience it takes to deal with those kinds of speeds.
Yeah, a whole nother episode right there, like living your life over 400 and experiencing things as they come at you at that speed. I can't even imagine, basically airliner speeds, but on the ground, crazy stuff. Kenny?
Yeah, or like George said, that run was just faster than the plane I flew in on.
Yeah, right.
That's a great analogy. That is excellent.
Right. You're flying coast to coast on an airliner, and he is going quicker than 5 miles at Bonneville. Kenny, thank you very much for spending time with Keith Jones and myself.
Yeah, real quick before you go, Kenny, we talked about getting in the cockpit. This goes back, and it's one of those things. I had the opportunity to go up there in Speedway's streamliner years and years and years ago. And it was offered to me. It's like, hey, we'll run you through. You put this run on, and then we'll turn it up a little bit. We'll put that run on, and we'll turn it up a little bit. And the long story is, we'll get you 200 mile an hour hat. We'll work you through the paces and do all that stuff. And that was, that's got to be 15, 18 years ago now. And at the time, it was, it comes back to do it while it's in front of you, because I'm like, nah, I'm kind of busy this year, maybe next year. And well, of course, next year never came, and so I missed my shot.
Yeah, well, and they do put you through a driving test. You got to run some more mundane speeds before they let you go wide open, and it's kind of interesting, because it'd be like if you were on a long freeway with nothing alongside the road to judge your speed by. So you really don't quite get the sensation of speed that you would like in a drag race, for example. Where you've got a car beside you, maybe, or the walls beside you or something that you can look at. But the speeds, I mean, I have to think probably 200 at Bonneville is pretty much like a cruise down the freeway at 80 miles an hour. So The runs last a little bit longer, 3-mile course or a 5-mile course, and it's all interesting. But one little tidbit that you really get a kick out of, the amount, our total time in the 5th mile, I believe, was 7.47 seconds.
What?
Wow.
So that, you normally don't hear a number like that. How long does it take, to, a mile a minute? Well, when you're in the middle 7-second range, covering a mile,
wow,
that just kind of give you
7.47 seconds in the final mile. Wow.
The first time I saw that number was at an FIA meet we had years ago, and I think we had about a 460 speed there, and it was about 7 8/10 seconds in that mile. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. Nobody ever broke it down like that, and so it does. I guess if you get sustained that, those guys could be in Salt Lake City in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Hey, on that note, is that the top secret what you just gave us?
One thing about that whole deal, there's no secrets. If the guy bought the Hot Rod magazine last month's issue or the month previous issue, Marlon Davis had 11 pages on that thing, and he didn't leave out anything. Even the cam card is there, and so there's no proprietary information. And
Marlon's a good writer. I just had to throw that in real quick. I haven't talked to him in a while, but he's a good guy.
Yeah, he does. He does an excellent job. And I did ask him. I said, Marlon, why'd you put the cam card in there? Well, he sent me the cam card. I said, I sent that so you could get the duration numbers off of it. I said, there's nothing really weird about it other than the exhaust lobe on the camshaft is something that nobody has ran currently to date. But did it make a difference? I don't know. I mean, it might have been worse than the one we put on it before. So, but he's very detail oriented, so he got all the details in. I mean, it's and my wife asked me, she says, well, why'd you tell everybody that? I said, well, Margie, that started 2 years ago. That's old news now. I mean, if we were to build that engine again today, would I build the same engine? And absolutely no, it'd be a different engine. So, it's everything is current at a point in time, but by the time it reaches the newsstands, it's not necessarily new news. So.
Got it.
I wanted to throw it. It was like one of those. It's like, yeah, that's the cam that's in it. Wink, wink. Is that the cam you want the world to think that's in there, or do you want your competition to run? It's like, yeah, that's the cam.
it is the real deal. I mean, but it doesn't make it difference if everybody has the same box of stuff to work out of. You see it all the time. With identical vehicles and different drivers and different preparations and stuff. There really is no two identical anything, and probably no two people would ever duplicate what they read in its entirety.
Makes sense. Kenny, thank you very much for spending time with Keith Jones and myself. Very educational. This episode has been, very current, a current story, a big deal story. The fact that Total Seal is involved, that is just tremendous, and we really appreciate the fact that you shared a lot of the details of what went on behind the scenes with us.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. It's a pleasure.
We appreciate it, Kenny. Thanks for taking the time out of your day. I know you're a busy guy, and we're right off of a holiday weekend, which I remember you telling me you didn't even realize it was a holiday. You worked right through it.
Yeah, you make progress when nobody's around.
Yep.
Excellent. Kenny, thank you so much. Congratulations on this milestone.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kenny.
Kenny Duttweiler with us here on Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. Keith, that was incredible considering the circumstance. This is a big story, and he just laid it all out there for us.
Yeah, Kenny's one of those guys. He's not keeping secrets. I mean, maybe there's a little something here tucked away, but he'll pretty much tell you the way it is. This is what I've got. This is what we did. This is how we accomplished it. And he's a real straight shooter. And one of those kinds of guys, you can call him and ask him anything. For you guys to have your rings in there, that's pretty amazing, keeping it sealed up. Seeing that they burned a piston and were able to keep the ring seal. What about these hoops that you did in lieu of an O-ring? Explain that. That actually sounded very interesting. Yeah, what we did with, Kenny called me, it was a project a couple of years ago. They kept having problems, couldn't keep the O-rings into the head. It just kept leaking. And we just started kind of talking about, it's like, what if we built a solid hoop, let's call it that way, that's rectangular, not round, so it's got squared corners. You're gonna seal on the corner, you're going to have an increased seal at the corner than you are over that radius. So it's less likely to leak. So we built a rectangular one-piece hoop or sealing ring that's going to go into the block, and of course, receiving groove into the head, dead soft or soft copper head gasket, and you work your way into it. We've actually built them for quite a few people. One of the guys in our shop, Rob, he's got them in his turboed small block, unbelievable ring seal. Well, once Ken got that all together, I called him a couple weeks later. How good was it, Ken? He said, you cost me a crank. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, it sealed the head so good it knocked the bottom end out of it.
Wow. And so basically the shape I'm visualizing, similar to piston ring shape, but just a circle that is on the top and around the top of the piston for the gasket to mate to, as opposed to a O-ring, which is like very thin and narrow. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the typical sealing ring that would go in there would be a round wire that you would kind of tamp into a receiving groove on the block. So
Sure.
It's radius, it's round. What we created for them was rectangular, so it stood up tall in a rectangular shape, so you had nice squared corners, and you're going to have increased seal at the corner versus the radius. The radius is going to want the gases can slip around it. At the corner, you've got that intersection point, so you're creating a high contact load point in those corners, and that's where the increased ring, seal came from. Now, one of the things Kenny had mentioned earlier is with that style, the cutout in the block and the cutout in the head have to be really, really dead on. So we did some for him where we actually did put an end gap in it. It allowed him to kind of file fit it, get them together, made it easier to install and butt the ends up tight. And same thing, unbelievable increase in head gasket seal and easy install, no issues.
Amazing stuff. And for people who are out there listening thinking, man, I've got a project, it's maybe not trying to go 470 miles per hour both ways, but they want to get the best ring seal, you always tell them to give you a call. Why don't you give them that information?
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out to me. You can always contact us through the website, totalseal.com, or you can call us at the toll-free 800-874-2753. My extension's 203, but any of the people here that can help you out, they're sharp. We're enthusiasts. We love doing what we do. So we're all into this, and if you can't get a hold of me, you can ask for Rye, you can get a hold of Kevin, you can get a hold of Bobby. Matt, he's here. I don't know if he's going to take your call. He's pretty busy running the show. But maybe reach out to Joe. He's learned a lot about piston rings. We're going to bring him up the ladder here.
I have. I've learned so much. It's great for me and my other gig as an announcer at the NHRA, and might as well timestamp it. Congratulations to the Total Seal team getting to the final round of the U.S. Nationals. Didn't quite go all the way, but a really strong event. And for Matt to get to the final round, that is a huge deal. So kudos to you guys. Congratulations on a good run. Of course, they would have loved to have won it, but making the final round of the Big Go, that's tremendous.
It truly is. I just got to interject there. I was so happy for Matt when I was kind of following on the internet, and we'll just say I wish my DirecTV box and not hitting on DirecTV, it's all me, would have made the channel change at the end of the first round. So I didn't get the rest of it taped, but I will tonight. But it was so great to see what he did, and kind of like Kenny said, they left a little bit there. So they're going back again next year. They're going to get the next number. They're going to hit that 500. And I know that's what's going to happen for Matt at Indy. I was so proud of the team and all the people working so hard on that car. They almost had it, so they're going to go there next year, and I know they're going to have it because these guys just keep getting better and better.
Great job. Keith, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.
He's Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales at Total Seal. I'm Joe Costello. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at WFO Joe. We love hearing your feedback at Total Seal's social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Hit up Keith Jones if you have any questions. Of course, if you're building an engine, call their toll-free number. Rate and review Hidden Horsepower. Amazing stuff. We've had so many great episodes, whether Tom Martino or Ed Pink, Jason Line. They're all there waiting for you. Different perspectives, different engine builders, and more podcasts to come. Apple Podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud. You can hear it in so many places, and we really appreciate you guys. Check out Total Seal's brand new website as well. More great interviews coming with the best of the best when it comes to engine building. Have a great day, everybody. This is Hidden Horsepower.